if we let it get this bad? We're women who in a split second have to defend their lives, the lives of their children, and we punish them by throwing them in prison and throwing away the key.
After being terrorized in their own homes by their abusers, these women are now being re-victimized by the criminal justice system that was for all intent and purposes blind to most important facts about their cases.
These women would likely have been convicted of lesser crimes or not have been convicted at all had expert testimony on intimate partner battering been admitted during their original trial proceedings.
My own experience with domestic violence brought me to where I am today. Like many of you, I had no idea there was a double injustice in our criminal justice system until I met these women in prison.
I was a circuit court judge for 17 years. In those 17 years, I must have tried at least one first-degree murder case a year, sometimes two. I sentenced all those people to life in prison, slept well, didn't think about it one time because they deserved it, and society had to be protected. Now, I'm not criticizing the jury, and never did, based on the evidence that they heard. But they were limited, or I should say Dr. Lenora Walker was limited in testifying. She testified in a general fashion, but they were not allowed to have Dr. Lenora Walker explain and relate those situations, and that was why I think the jury made a mistake. Now, Dr. Lenora Walker said, "I've testified in over 50 trials in 35 states, and never has my testimony been so limited as the state of Michigan."
This is a story that's happening in Michigan this week. And I come from a place in the Michigan Department of Corrections where women were treated like this, and when they finally fought back, in my opinion, they didn't get fair trials.
It's archaic and impossible to believe that the courts in Michigan will not allow battered women that defense today. People versus Christel has been used to prevent people from introducing the battered women syndrome as a defense. It's like cutting off their lifeline.
The other way the legislature can speak to this topic is through the expert witness statute. The legislature can say that there are, in cases of battered spouse syndrome, an expert witness should be able to do more than simply describe what that syndrome is, but should be able to evaluate an individual person and give an expert opinion about whether that person was suffering from that syndrome. And other states have done that. Missouri has a statute that does exactly that. They can actually make the kind of changes that can make a difference for people that Kelly is fighting for. And it was an opinion that set out the standard for how expert witnesses can testify in cases where someone claims to be a victim of battered spouse syndrome. And I think it's more commonly called battered spouse syndrome now in most states. And in that case, the court limited the ability of an expert to do anything more than explain what battered spouse syndrome is. The court said that the expert, if there is such an expert, can't then connect that testimony to the particular person in the case. The expert witness cannot say, this particular person is suffering from battered spouse syndrome or acted because of battered spouse syndrome, or explain any of the individual facts in the case as a result of that syndrome. So the expert testimony is permitted sort of at 10,000 feet and not connected to the individuals in the case. But there are other ways in which we can make sure that the people who are charged with prosecuting understand what battered spouse syndrome is, right? Think about who your elected prosecutors are. Those are elected officials as well. Right. And their assistants, and the sheriff in your county and the local police. These are all folks who it makes a big difference if they understand at the front end what battered spouse syndrome is, because they actually have an awful lot of power at the start when they decide what to charge someone with or whether to charge someone, right? So who the people are who are sitting in our prosecutors' offices and in our sheriff's departments and in our local police departments and frankly on our benches, making sure those people are educated in and understand what this syndrome is about can make an awful lot of difference in many individual cases.
It's more than just, I was slapped or I was punched or I was hit or whatever the abuse was. We're also dealing with the psychological effect that abuse has, whether it's verbal or physical. That creates quite a dynamic, in particular if that victim has become dependent upon the person that's abusing them. And so oftentimes what we were seeing is that victims were coming to court or coming in and saying, A, they wanted to drop the charges, or they were completely recanting their story about what had happened to them. The only way that we can help them and help the person that's abusing them is for them to tell the truth. We sat down with Every Woman's Place and developed a strategy on how we were going to handle those cases where the victims were still going to maintain their recantation story. My philosophy was that we were going to continue with those prosecutions, but we needed a piece during that trial to help educate jurors on why a person who got punched in the face several times and was black and blue all over, why they would come to court under oath and say either A, that didn't happen, what I told the police is a lie, or I fell down the stairs, or whatever the case is. And so Every Woman's Place was an active part in working with us, and because they have the folks that can tell the jury, explain to the jury the dynamics of that kind of syndrome, that abuse cycle that folks go through, and why they do those things. When from the outside looking in, you can't understand why somebody would actually do that. We bring their social workers in or their workers in, and they have actually been qualified as experts here in Muskegon County. I'm happy to support them, and they're happy to be partners with us, and so to me it's a win-win situation. I think it has a lot to do with power. Unfortunately, and I don't know the statistics, but I know they're out there, that men who grow up in that environment, who see that growing up, are more likely to become abusers themselves. I have seen women who have separated themselves, and it took a lot of discipline and a lot of willpower and a lot of strength and courage to do it, but I have seen women separate themselves from their abuser, and the relief on their face, you could just tell that a weight has been lifted from them. It really is, it makes you feel good about what you're doing.
I am Fiona Mom. I'm the chair of the Domestic Violence Select Committee, and I've been the chair for the last 5 years. But there are still about 50 women still in jail today that were convicted prior to 1992 that don't have an opportunity to have their cases heard because either there was no paperwork, they didn't file a restraining order, they didn't go to the hospital. These women acted out of distress, out of self-defense, and imminent danger.
When we as citizens look at these stories, we say, that can't be, because we would never let that happen. We would never let that happen, right? So these women must be lying, there must be something wrong. And I tell you what, these women are amazing, incredible human beings.
I was 20 years old when I was arrested. I was 47 ultimately when I got out. That was over half of my life. But there are cracks, and it's the women that fall through those cracks that we're talking about today. I had a chance. Let's give them a chance.